Good afternoon to each and everyone. For today's topic, we are going to discuss about the Mendel's observable pattern of inheritance, or what we call as Mendel insights into inheritance patterns. More than a year ago, people wondered on the basis of inheritance, or tinatawag natin na namamana na DNA ng isang babae at lalaki. It was a common knowledge that sperm and eggs both transmit information about traits to offspring, but few suspected that the information is organized in units, or what we call genes instead. The idea was that a father's blob of information blended with the mother's blob like a cream into coffee at a fertilization. So, para mas maliwanagan tayo, let's define first what is inheritance. Inheritance. It is the transition of traits or information from one generation, individual, or cells to the next. So yun, nag-occur din siya into two different overall mechanisms na tinatawag nating genetic inheritance and epigenetic inheritance. So when we say genetic inheritance, it occurs due to the genetic material in the form of DNA being passed from the parents to their offspring. When organisms reproduce, all the information for growth, survival, and reproduction for the next generation is found in the DNA passed down from the parent generation. Epigenetic inheritance is the transmission of epigenetic markers from one organism to the next that affects the traits of offspring without altering the primary structure of DNA. So in other words, epigenetically. Next, let's move on how Mendel approaches experimental about inheritance. So, Mendel was been raised in a farm, and he was aware of our agricultural principles and their applications. He kept a brief of breeding experiment and the development described on the available literature. Yun, naging member din siya ng Regional Agricultural Society, and he also won awards for developing and improving varieties of vegetables and fruits. So yun na nga, katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, nakasali siya ng Regional Agricultural Society, then nagkaroon siya ng awards about agriculture. Kaya masabi rin natin na na maalam si Gregor Johann Mendel, especially on plants or halaman. And dahil din doon, mas pinili niyang ipaliwanag yung inheritance sa pamamagitan ng pag-experiment katulad na lamang ng garden pea plant. So, garden pea plant. First figure, showing the location of stamen and carpel. Sperm-producing pollen grains form in stamens. Eggs develop, fertilization takes place, and seeds mature inside carpels. So, just like I have said on the first figure, it shows the location of carpel and stamen. When we say carpel, it is the unit of female reproductive system structures of a flower, and stamen is the male reproductive system or structure of a flower. Second figure, kung makikita nyo dito, sinasabi na after ng purple flowers mabrush onto flower bud of plant, then nabreed siya onto white flower. Natanggal yung stamen ng white flower. So, yun yung pinaka-important part para may assure natin na nangyayari yung cross-fertilization sa halaman. And then, pagkatapos nun, nagkaroon ng producing of seeds and nagdevelop na rin to onto new plants. Then the last, the flower color of each plant can be used visible evidence of pattern in how hereditary material might be transmitted to it from each parent part. So yun na nga, he started to experiment garden pea plant, and yung pinili niyang pag-eksperimentuhan na garden pea plant is yung Pisum salivum, na kung saan yung halaman na to is kaya mag-fertilize mag-isa. Then based din sa book na binasa ko, meron siyang male and female gametes na kung saan tinatawag na sperm and eggs. Yun. So for us, in order to understand more about Johann Mendel inheritance experiment, let's watch this video.
These days, scientists know how you inherit characteristics from your parents. They're able to calculate probabilities of having a specific trait or getting a genetic disease according to the information they have from the parents and the family history. But how is this possible? To understand how traits pass from one living being to its descendants, we need to go back in time to the 19th century and a man named Gregor Mendel. Mendel was an Austrian monk and biologist who loved to work with plants. By breeding the pea plants he was growing in the monastery's garden, he discovered the principles that rule heredity. In one of the most classic examples, Mendel combined a purebred yellow-seeded plant with a purebred green-seeded plant, and he got only yellow seeds. He called the yellow color trait the dominant one, because it was expressed in all the new seeds. Then he let the new yellow-seeded hybrid plants self-fertilize, and in this second generation he got both yellow and green seeds, which meant that the green trait had been hidden by the dominant yellow. He called this hidden trait the recessive trait. From those results, Mendel inferred that each trait depends on a pair of factors, one of them coming from the mother and the other from the father. Now we know that these factors are called alleles and represent the different variations of a gene. Depending on which type of allele Mendel found in each seed, we can have what we call a homozygous pea, where both alleles are identical, and what we call a heterozygous pea, when the two alleles are different. This combination of alleles is known as genotype, and its result, being yellow or green, is called phenotype. To clearly visualize how alleles are distributed amongst descendants, we can use a diagram called the Punnett square. You just place the different alleles on both axes, and then you figure out the possible combinations. Let's look at Mendel's peas, for example. Let's write the dominant yellow allele as an uppercase Y, and the recessive green allele as a lowercase y. The uppercase y always overpowers its lowercase friend, so the only time you get green babies is if you have two lowercase y's. In Mendel's first generation, the yellow homozygous pea mom will give each pea kid a yellow dominant allele, and the green homozygous pea dad will give a green recessive allele, so all the pea kids will be yellow heterozygous. Then, in the second generation, where the two heterozygous kids marry, their babies could have any of the three possible genotypes, showing the two possible phenotypes in a 3-to-1 proportion. But even peas have a lot of characteristics. For example, besides being yellow or green, peas may be round or wrinkled. So we could have all these possible combinations: round yellow peas, round green peas, wrinkled yellow peas, and wrinkled green peas. To calculate the proportions for each genotype and phenotype, we can use a Punnett square too. Of course, this will make it a little more complex. And lots of things are more complicated than peas, like, say, people. These days, scientists know a lot more about genetics and heredity, and there are many other ways in which some characteristics are inherited. But it all started with Mendel and his peas.
So, for the last part, ito yung pinakamahalagang part na ginagamit sa genetics na kailangan natin malaman. So, genes are units of information about specific traits, cells with a diploid chromosomes number. Mutation can alter a gene's molecular structure. When offspring inherit a pair of identical alleles for a trait generation after generation, when both alleles of a pair are identical, this is homozygous condition. An allele is the dominant when its effect on a trait matches that of any recessive allele paired with it. Putting this all together, a homozygous dominant individual has a pair of dominant allele. Two terms help keep the distinction clear between genes and the traits that they specify. So, for the P, is parental generation. For the F1, first generation offspring. For the F2, second generation offspring. So, that's all. Thank you for listening on my topic.